Live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Sonali Basak.
And I'm Tim Stenovec. Welcome to Bloomberg Crypto, a look at the people, transactions, and technology shaping the world of decentralized finance.
And Kamala Harris and Donald Trump face off on tonight's debate stage. Will we hear anything about crypto? We're going to break down each candidate's stance.
And Sheila Warren, CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation, joins us to discuss the highly anticipated event and other key events in D.C. tied to crypto.
And Gemini COO Marshall Beard joins us on their latest survey, showing that a small percentage of retail investors are embracing ETFs as their sole crypto holding.
All that and more over the next half hour on Bloomberg Crypto. First, though, a snapshot of the market over the last week or so. And, well, last week was pretty wild. Bitcoin falling more than 3% on Thursday, then another 5.7% on Friday, before recovering a little bit earlier in this week. It was also a time when we saw volatility in other risk assets. I mean, last week was the worst week for the S&P 500 since the regional banking crisis of 2023, and the worst week for the stocks going all the way back to 2020, and crypto was not spared. That said, Bitcoin now down only about 2% over the last week. Sonali?
I'm also taking a look at Bitcoin ETF flows because, of course, this was the excitement of the year, but they're now having their longest streak of outflows of $1.2 billion that happened in the 8 days through September 6th. Now, Tim, after that, you have seen a little bit of inflows, but yet they have been muted. And the bulk of the inflows that we have seen, you really have to go back to when Bitcoin was trading pretty much significantly higher here, more than $60,000. And of course, we are now below that level. And you've seen the interest in these spot ETFs decline along with it.
We're going to talk more in just a few minutes with Gemini COO Marshall Beard about those ETFs. But first, it is debate night in Philadelphia. Let's discuss where the candidates stand on crypto with Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Kayleigh Lines, who's in Washington, D.C. Kayleigh, we know, thanks to polling, what's important to voters countrywide. Here in the U.S., abortion, immigration, the economy, of course. Where does crypto fall?
Well, it depends on what kind of voter you're talking about, Tim, and largely whether or not they are a holder of crypto or digital assets themselves. I know you're going to have Gemini coming up later on in the program. They've done a survey that found of those who hold cryptocurrencies, about 73% of them do consider a candidate's digital asset policy and how they will vote. But of course, it matters specifically the voters in very specific states and how they think about this issue. The 7 key swing states that ultimately will decide the Electoral College and therefore the outcome of this election. And interestingly, the digital currency group DCG and the Harris poll put out some research on the swing states specifically earlier this year that found 1 in 5 voters there do consider cryptocurrency to be a major issue in this election. So a stat like that is something that both of these candidates may pay more attention to. And of course, you also have to consider the demographics of those who hold cryptocurrencies as well. Polling has shown us consistently they tend to be young men of color, Black and Latinos, groups of voters that both candidates want to attract and actually have turn out for them in this election in November. So considering the demographics of these groups is important as well. And that's why you're seeing the Trump campaign definitely embrace this full-throatedly. The Harris campaign less so, that they have been talking about embracing the innovation more.
Well, let's talk about the differences. Last week, we spoke to, for example, the chief legal officer over at Coinbase. And he spoke to not only that Trump enthusiasm around crypto, but importantly, the difference between Harris and Biden. Harris being more willing to engage with the crypto community. The question is, how willing?
Well, that is kind of the open question. I would note, Sonali, that we do finally have the policy and issues page on the Harris campaign website. There is a mention of innovation, but there is no outright mention of crypto. There is no mention of crypto at all in the wider Democratic National Committee policy platform that was adopted in Chicago last month either. So this isn't necessarily an official policy stance, even though she may be more open to the industry and the innovation it brings than, say, President Biden has been. And of course, Sonali, you yourself have been involved in reporting here at Bloomberg that does suggest those close to Harris are pushing for her to say, fire the current SEC chair, Gary Gensler, and appoint someone a little more friendly to the industry. Of course, Donald Trump has not had kind words for Gary Gensler either, and he has been much more vocal in talking about the crypto industry, saying he wants to make America the Bitcoin capital of the world, the crypto capital of the world. And crypto actually is one of the pieces in the Republican Party platform, specifically talking about ending the crackdown that has been present in this current administration on that, in the words of the RNC. And I would point out as well, the Trump family is getting more engaged in crypto as his sons, Eric and Don Jr., have their new project, World Liberty Financial, that they're launching. It has actually been met with some skepticism, even criticism from those in the crypto industry, worried it may do some reputational damage, but it is more evidence of the embracing of crypto that we are seeing more so on the Trump side.
Kaylee, down there in Washington, D.C., where you find yourself, money is all over politics. No question about that. You've been following the money. Give us an idea of where crypto spending is when it comes to this election cycle, not just on the presidential, for the presidential election, but down ballot as well.
Well, down ballot is really where that money is being centered, Tim. Of course, we've seen companies like Coinbase contributing tens of millions of dollars. PACs like Fairshake, for example, have well over $100 million that they're deploying into different races. This isn't just about the presidential race, because, yes, the president does have the power to, say, appoint regulators, be it the SEC or the CFTC or others. But it's actually Congress that has the ability to write the laws that actually delineate the power those regulators have to oversee the industry. So it makes these down ballot races all the more important. We have seen this at work already in the primaries. We are likely to see it still more in the general election, especially when we consider really contentious races like the Senate race in Ohio, where the incumbent Democrat, the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, Sherrod Brown, is up against a pro-crypto lawmaker in Bernie Moreno. The Banking Committee, also, of course, critical in shaping the outcome of any future crypto legislation on the Hill. It's actually where a lot of legislation that has passed the House has gone to kind of die, if you will. It hasn't moved forward. And the question is going to be, depending on the balance of Congress, can legislation like we saw the FIT 21 Act pass earlier this year actually make it all the way through into the future president's desk?
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons, thank you so much for your reporting and your analysis. Remember, Bloomberg Television and Radio will have special coverage of ABC's presidential debate between Harris and Trump tonight, starting at 8 p.m. New York time. We're going to now bring in Crypto Counsel for Innovation CEO Sheila Warren. And you heard Kaylee's analysis here, the reporting that we've had already around the differences between Harris and Trump as it pertains to crypto. We've also talked a lot on this program lately around how it's becoming more of a toss-up even in the crypto community. We've had many months here where we've had guest after guest tell us they were a single issue voter. But when you look at the possibility now for more warmth from the Harris administration, is it more of a toss-up in your view, or do you think more people are still leaning towards Trump, who has been more vocal?
Well, I think if you look at the demographic that is single issue voters, I mean, as noted, as Kaylee noted so aptly, you do have a large proportion of American voters who do actually own crypto and who do consider this an important factor in the determination of who they're going to vote for. I do think that there is sufficient daylight between Harris and Biden that people that maybe were not inclined to be on the Trump train are taking another look. Now, as Kaylee also noted so accurately, there is still distance between the two. You do have a party, the Republican Party, that has issued statements in the platform that are supportive of crypto, and we don't see that on the Democratic Party side. And you have in Trump and his family candidates who seem to be going all in on this to the point of launching a project, whereas you certainly don't see that happening in the Harris campaign. So I think it remains to be seen, Shanali, but I do think we're seeing that there is more consideration of the Democratic presidential candidate now than there was under Biden by this demographic of voters.
Okay, you brought up the Trump family project, World Liberty Financial, got a lot of attention a few days ago. Do you think that's net a good thing for the crypto industry or not?
You know, I will ask this question, and it's not a rhetorical question, which is, what is World Liberty Financial? And I don't know that any of us know. I mean, if you know, I'd love to know. Everything I've seen about it, it's still a pretty vague conceptual thing. What I will say is that if it really is a DeFi project, these are incredibly difficult to build. They're one of the hardest things to actually code and to get execution around, not to mention user interface that's actually user-friendly. So I will be very curious when this thing actually launches to see what it is. Overall, you know, no, I don't necessarily think that. I think there are look, everyone has different skills. I think there are people who are very skilled politicians and people who are very skilled coders. And so I'm reserving judgment until I actually can kick the tires on a thing. And for now, my question remains. I don't really know what it is. And it's interesting that we have a candidate who's going so all in to the point of a family project. But until I know more details, I'm hesitant to say whether it's going to be a pro or a con for the industry. I'll just leave it at it's very interesting. interesting.
Very interesting to see the former president warm up to the crypto industry in this way. Of course, he has made about turns in this space. One of the other things that he has put out there, let's say as a promise or a proposal, is this made in USA idea for Bitcoin. The reality of the situation is when you look at a lot of the biggest mining firms in the world, the companies that people really rely on, Bitmain Technologies, 90% of the market for computers to mine Bitcoin. How hard is it to move that activity away? Is it even realistic for it to happen over the next 4 years?
So actually, it's actually quite easy. And what we saw when China banned Bitcoin mining back in, you'll have to check my math on the year, but maybe 5 years ago, you saw a very, very quick transfer of the hard assets needed to use to mine, to some to Texas, some to Kazakhstan, to other places in the world. These rigs can actually be broken down and put back up very quickly. So the reality is actually in most cases, the operations are not that hard to move geographically. And it really is a question of where do you have the energy support? Where do you have the policy support? Where does it make the most sense for this activity to actually happen? I should also note that a lot of Bitcoin mining operations, as I know you know, Sonali and Tim, are actually transitioning now into being broader data center facilities. So with the use of energy by AI, which is actually starting to dwarf, in many cases, the Bitcoin energy usage, you're actually seeing some of these that have other applications or other uses that are staying put. So, so while it is pretty easy for them to pick up and go, I think that the reality is that there's a lot of reason for them to stay, and policy that supports that is certainly something that I think is achievable by any administration.
Crypto Counsel for Innovation CEO Sheila Warren joining us here on Bloomberg Crypto. Really appreciate you taking the time, Sheila.
Thanks.
Well, coming up, Gemini COO joins us here on set to discuss the latest survey, which shows how much regulation is getting in the way of retail adoption of digital assets.
And Coinbase's suit to force the SEC to engage in crypto rulemaking begins this month. Bloomberg intelligence analysts say that Coinbase faces long odds.
And to access all the latest data on and news on crypto, check out CRYP Go on the terminal. This is Bloomberg. Despite tens of billions of dollars in value, only about 13% of crypto owners in the U.S. own their digital assets exclusively through ETFs. The industry also seeing a growing number of male investors since 2022. That's just a snapshot of Gemini's 2024 Global State of Crypto report. The company's COO Marshall Beard joins us now on set in New York. Marshall, good to have you with us. We're going to talk about those tidbits in just a minute, but I do want to start with politics and the election, because some really interesting findings in the State of Crypto report about how people think about the election. The vast majority of crypto owners in the U.S., according to you guys, plan to consider a candidate's digital asset policies when they vote for the next president. 73%. What does consider mean, though? Does it mean a top issue, or it's just in the back of their head?
I do not think it's single issue, right? It's just consider. So what we found in our State of Crypto report is that 3/4 of U.S. crypto holders are considering policies for when they go to the ballot box this fall. So really interesting. I don't think it's single issue. I think that's part of their overall decision.
It's interesting because this year you have had the opportunity for far more retail interest in some ways with the advent of the ETF. But heading into this election cycle, anyone who bought in at that high is now in the red, right? I mean, you did see record movement in Bitcoin prices, but you've seen the longest streak of outflows recently as well. Why buy an ETF if you could just buy crypto?
Depends. Different types of investors out there. What we found in our report is that of the holders of crypto in the U.S., 13% of them first-time crypto buyers through the ETF. So really promising that people are entering the ecosystem now through these ETFs, but there's still a lot of education and growth to go there.
Sonali, we got to talk about the crypto bros, because there are a lot of bros owning crypto.
I'm not a bro.
You're not, but according to this report, 69% of crypto owners identify as male, 31% identify as female, compares to 58% and 42% respectively in 2022. The gender gap is widening. Why is that?
It's interesting. So, as you mentioned, what we found is that 70% are male, 30% are female holders. I mean, it's a great representation. I think what it shows is that, for companies like us and for the industry, that we need to build better consumer products for accessibility and education as well.
How do you do that, though? How do you get more women into crypto?
Yeah, I mean, we sponsor lots of events. Our female leadership team at Gemini does a lot of outreach and education in their communities as well. I think it's really just education.
At the end of the day, what is the demographic breakdown from what you understand about age as well? I mean, are these younger people that are typically buying in? Do you find more kind of people above the millennial level really buying in as well? What is the purpose, do you find, for people to be holding?
I don't believe that our report got into age demographics too detailed, but I can tell you just from my personal experience and from being in the industry for quite some time, it's usually younger. New technology, interesting components to it that kind of, might scare or be confusing for older or other generations. So we mostly see younger people looking for a new technology to invest in.
Only I can take a crypto show and make it about bank capital rules, but you sit here today and you have these new rules about to hit the financial industry, and at least at the beginning, you had a lot of kind of undertones, frustrations with the traditional financial system that led to the use of crypto. It's strange because now a lot of these crypto companies have paired with traditional finance companies. Post FTX in particular, you've seen kind of those large companies like BlackRock add a degree of confidence and safety to the system. So what does that dynamic look like now? Is this an alternative to the financial system?
It's an alternative, but it's also an addition. Right? I don't think the traditional financial markets are going away, anytime soon. But you see in our report, one of the areas of focus was Turkey. And you see much larger adoption than in the US or the UK and France, the other areas that we looked at, basically due to inflation. They get into stablecoins much easier as a hedge for inflation. So there is real use case for this technology. You see it in developing nations, maybe a little more than in the US. But that's what people are doing.
But does that mean there's no use case for it in the developed world, like in the United States, where inflation is not?
Or at least a significantly lessened one.
Because I did notice in the report, it was something that I continue to see in report after report, which is people aren't using crypto to buy and sell things necessarily. They're holding it for an investment. So they're not using it to transact.
Correct. People don't like spending their Bitcoin, just like you don't want to use a piece of your Apple stock to buy a coffee, right? And so not a lot of people use it as Bitcoin specifically as a currency. They use it as a store of value.
Create some interesting ramifications for stablecoin. We do have to leave it there, but come back. That is Gemini COO Marshall Beard. Now coming up, Coinbase is taking on the SEC in court later this month. Bloomberg Intelligence gives us the details on where that case stands and what the odds are. That's up next. This is Bloomberg.
Well, State Street and Galaxy are launching a trio of crypto-focused ETFs, even as investors pull back from spot Bitcoin funds. Here are the funds that begin trading today. Instead of purely holding cryptocurrencies, these new funds will buy shares of crypto-linked companies in combination with other ETFs that hold physical Bitcoin or futures.
More like an actual ETF, where there's a little bit of divergence and what do you call it, a disparity here, rather than just holding one thing. Anyways, we're going to move now and talk about Coinbase, because the suit to force the SEC to engage in crypto rulemaking begins this month. And Bloomberg Intelligence analyst Elliot Stein says Coinbase faces long odds. He joins us now to discuss. I do want to do what we were doing a little earlier and just break down the difference here between the suits, because Coinbase has been, let's say, pretty aggressive when it comes to the SEC. They, in your calculation here, may win some things, but may not win others. What are you seeing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I think a lot of people are familiar with the SEC's lawsuit against Coinbase, which was filed in June of 2023, accusing Coinbase of operating as an unregistered exchange, an unregistered broker, an unregistered clearing agency.
And you believe they have better odds there?
I think Coinbase has a good chance of winning in that case. I think that case is destined for the Supreme Court to figure out which digital assets are securities and which aren't. But there's this other case in which we're going to have a hearing on September 23rd. And this is Coinbase sort of going on the offensive and suing the SEC to get the SEC to engage in rulemaking around which digital assets are securities or not.
And you, in this one, give the company only a 30% chance of winning. Why is that?
Well, this is, I think, a tough lawsuit for Coinbase to win. Agencies have a lot of discretion in terms of rulemaking. They get a lot of leeway in how they prioritize the timing and other rules that they want to make. And courts are reluctant to sort of encroach upon that, right? There's a separation of powers. Administrative agencies should make the rules. Courts should then see if those rules exceed the agency's authority or not. But it's a different thing for a court to come in and say, yes, you, the SEC, should be promulgating these rules.
Is the court process somehow more efficient or effective for a venue for Coinbase to use? Because you think about how much lobbying money and other types of political spending has gone into Congress to try to make sure these rules don't happen in the future. So are the courts a better way here to move faster?
Sometimes. right, D.C. takes
Slow as well.
Things take a long time in D.C., but, court proceedings also take a long time. And so I don't necessarily know if it's more efficient, but it is sort of like all hands on deck in terms of Coinbase. Right? You see them sort of taking every approach they can, defending lawsuits, going on the offensive in litigation, and then also the lobbying.
Elliot, 10 seconds, real quick. If Trump wins and then in 2025 there's a different chair of the SEC, do the odds change?
I think the odds change in terms of the SEC's case against Coinbase. I could see a different SEC maybe scaling that lawsuit back.
All right, Bloomberg Intelligence analyst Elliot Stein. Check out BIGO for all of his research on the Bloomberg terminal. That is going to do it for Bloomberg Crypto. Join us again next week. This is Bloomberg.